Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Friday Perashat class, Perashat Haye Sara. There are highlights in this parasha. I would say not as chock full of content as the last two, but most people relate to the beginning where Abraham has his struggle and eventual burial of his wife Sara. And afterwards, the famous story of the quest for a wife for Yitzhak Avinu and Eliezer's Abraham's servant's trip to Haran and the aftermath, everything that unfolded after that trip, and of course the aftermath with Yitzhak marrying Rivka. Less focused upon is a very short story at the end of the parasha, which is really the last Abraham Avinu story, the last episode in his life of which we're told, and the last glimpse that we have of Abraham Avinu. It sort of got lost in all the other dramatic stories, and because the parasha ends in listing of lineage of Yishmael, right before that, this short 6 pasuk long story got lost in the mix somewhere. Not saying that it's not studied, I'm saying that it's not studied as much. So let's talk about these 6 pasukim, the overview of the episode, and then at the same time as we view it in a very surface level way, let's make some observations and ask some questions. So if you're following, it's in Haye Sara in Perek Kafeh, chapter 25, right in the beginning, pasuk Aleph. Vayosef Avraham vayikach isha u'shmaha Keturah. So Avraham, Yosef, he continued. He took a wife and her name was Keturah. A fair question would be, why did Avraham Avinu at this age, he's at least or past 140 years old, why at this age he saw necessary to take another wife? Actually, I'm going to ask you to sort of store in an inventory, build an inventory of questions and store them there until we address them. So I'll count on your memory. It's also fair to ask who Keturah is. That I'll address right now. There's a clear dispute and mahloket on this issue, where Rashi, based on the Midrash, says that she is the same Hagar that we knew from previous parashiot, while and others agree with Rashi, while Ibn Ezra and others say, in fact, that it's a different woman whose name is Keturah. The Radak actually proves that that is the case because of the fact that the support of Rashi and those who say it's Hagar is based on the extra yud in the word pilachshim, which we'll see later, concubines, and that's a derasha that's made, the missing yud. It's a derasha that's made to prove that she is Hagar, and the Radak says that more accurate versions have a yud in that word. In any case, that's a dispute, so we'll leave that to the commentators. Why take another wife? The pasuk and Torah goes on, pasuk bet, to actually speak of their children. And if you stop your average good Jew and learned person on the street and ask him how many children or who are the children of Abraham, unfortunately, most will get it wrong. 1, 2. The answer is no. The answer is 8. Do you know the 8 children of Abraham Avinu by heart? You should. It's Abraham Avinu, right? You know by Yitzhak and Ishmael. So, Vateled lo et Zimran, vet Yokshan, vet Medan, vet Mijan, vet Yishbach, vet Shuach. Those are the other 6 children of Abraham Avinu, real life children, to his wife Keturah. It then goes on in Pesukim, Gimal and Dalet to speak of further offspring as we go down the lineage and some of the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Abraham. One which we'll highlight in Pasuk Gimal is that his son Yokshan had a child named Dedan, and Dedan had children who the Torah says were Hayu Ashurim, Utushim, Ul-Ummim. 3 very interesting sounding words. Fair to ask, what does that mean? and what were they? What is the indication of the Torah in terms of the transformation or what became of these, of the lineage of Avraham Avinu? In any case, again, Pasuk Daled names some more offspring, and then what will really be our Pesukim 5 and 6, He and Vav, which raise our eyebrows with interest and inquiry. Vayitin Abraham et kol asher lo liYitzchak. Abraham gave everything of his, sounds like possessions, to Yitzchak. And Pasuk Vav, v'levnei pirachim asher Abraham, and to the children of the concubines that were of Abraham. We're going to leave this aside. Suffice it to say that some say that is the same keturah in our subject, and some say they're concubines of Abraham. The permissibility of that and that general concept we'll leave aside. But to these children, let's just assume it's the same children and grandchildren we were speaking about. Natan Abraham matanot, he gave them gifts. He sent them away from Yitzhak during his lifetime. Where? Kedma el Eres Kedem, eastbound, eastward to a land in the east. So, first we should ask, and we'll call this, I guess, question 3, that how could the Pasuk say that he gave everything of his to Yitzhak, and almost in the same breath in the next Pasuk say that he gave the other children gifts? So that means he didn't give everything to Yitzhak. And the fourth and final simple question, based on just textual observation, Perashat as they call it, he sent those during his lifetime, sent those children from Yitzhak and sent them eastward to Eres Kedem. First of all, it sounds difficult, to say the least, to send your children away, but why? Yitzhak Avinu at this point was already an older, mature adult, a person that we can tell by the rest of the episodes in the Perashat was an established person of stature. What is the fear over here? Why the necessity? We can reflect back to Ishmael being separated from Yitzhak at the time he was a little boy, and we can find logical reasons, but this does not seem necessary. So let's reflect back and try to unravel these issues one at a time. But it's really behooves us to mention that we don't get too many glimpses of anyone really in the Torah in terms relative to their lifespan. Avraham Avinu lived 175 years. We only get, despite the fact that he is highlighted in 3 parashiyot, especially in 2, we get really only glimpses of his life. And the Torah very intentionally offers us the opportunity of those glimpses, and it really it behooves us. We have to, consider this an opportunity and an obligation, really, to heed the call and to discover what the Torah is asking us to about Abraham and his life and general values from that story. So let's do it. All right, let's talk about. We spoke briefly about Keturah. He took another wife, and we asked why. The first thing that dawns upon us when you hear about an older person taking another wife at an older age, and this is actually mentioned by the Hachamim, the Baalei Musar, commentaries, based on a pasuk in Kohelet, Baboker zara azraecha ba'erev al tanach yadecha, that plant your seeds in the morning, don't let your hands rest or be lazy in the evening, meaning that even in older age, be productive, never stop progressing and producing every moment and every breath that God gives you in your life. And specifically, it means having children. And indeed, that is that pasuk, I quoted from Kohelet, alludes to the idea that one should, if he finds himself single as he moves on, he could still have children with a woman that could have children. Why not? He should, because you produce more offspring in this world and bring more people and members of Am Yisrael onto planet Earth. So in that spirit alone, there's a justification and a reason for Abraham Avinu getting married and taking a wife at this older age. There are others that say, like the Amek Davar, that, as we say in Perashat Bereshit, Lo tov heyot ha'adam levado, it's not appropriate for a person to be alone, have a partner, and as David HaMelech did in his older years, have someone to support you. The Radak says something. First, he says that, he did need an assistant to help him. But and a really profound idea that Abraham Avinu, so to speak, wanted to spread his seed around the world, meaning that besides his children, of course, it's nice to have all his disciples, but you can't substitute someone who's actually an offspring of Abraham Avinu. And to have more of those and perhaps let them disperse and have the opportunity to impact other people because they are descendants of Abraham and have certain innate qualities of the father of our nation, even though they might not be considered part of the nation going forward. Okay, enough reasons and justifications. Abraham took another wife at an older age. So he had children. We named the 6 of them. They had children, grandchildren. Torah names some of Abraham's great-grandchildren. And he says that these groups of people, at least from one of the children, were Ashurim, Utushim, Umim. Rashi says that those are just names of nations. That's the, as they grew and populated and became independent and self-contained communities, that's the name of the nations for whatever reason that they had. And others, Ibn Ezra, also support the idea that there's no real descriptive nature to these words. However, the Targum Unkelus, the Aramaic commentary, says as follows: these children or these offspring became Lemishiryan, Vilishkunin, Ulnachvan. And with the help of the Ramban, what the Unkelus is referring to is a certain lifestyle that these children took upon themselves. Ashurim means that they were sojourners in different camps, which means they traveled around and they settled and then they traveled more, so maybe they didn't have a permanent type of dwelling. Ultushim means that they were spread out in a tent-like fashion of dwelling. And Ulumim, the word Ulumim can mean nations, but here means islands, that they were dwellers in different islands and remote areas in that time of the less populated world. And I don't think we should focus too much on it, but I find it remarkable that the offspring of Abraham Avinu really embody some of his traits. And that is that, well, certainly they were travelers. You might even say that those names imply that they were leaders and they were entrepreneurs and they took initiative. And they might not have even known why they felt so comfortable with traveling, and that became the nature of their families and their communities. But they certainly received some of that from their father and great-grandfather, Abraham Avinu. But let's get to the crux of the issue. So Abraham he gave everything of his to Yitzhak and sent the others away. We should just say this is not an insensitive act. Indeed, they sent him to Eretz Kedem. Some commentators say to his extended family there, eastward in Haran, or he simply just sent them to other places of settlement to be able to derive benefit. He had property possibly in the east and allowed them to take hold of that property. So, and he gave them matanot, which is not just gifts, which includes inheritance as well. We can be sure of that. But yet he saw fit to send them away and to give everything. So what is this everything that he gave to Yitzhak Avinu? I think we need to preface the answer by going back to an episode in last week's Perashat, where after having Ishmael at the age of 87, he had Yitzhak at the age of 100. Sara saw at a certain point in the youth of Yitzhak that there was a negative influence coming from the direction of Ishmael. She told Abraham, Garesh I want you to kick out, I want you to thrust Hagar from our midst and her son, meaning Ishmael. And she gave a reason. Because the child of Hagar, which is Ishmael, will not inherit with Yitzhak. What was Avraham Avinu's immediate reaction? Vayera hadavar. This to him was a terrible suggestion. It was me'od, tremendously insensitive. To him, Yishmael was going to make it. He can stay under the auspices of Avraham Avinu's estate, is under his watchful eye. Yes, he was what we'll call a bad boy. He was influenced by his surroundings. He got into a bad way. He is maybe even currently a negative influence to Yitzhak. But to Avraham, that was no problem at all. Avraham Avinu spent a lifetime taking those that were misled, so to speak, off the path, in need of direction, and embracing them, directing them, and bringing them back to a godly way. He did it to hundreds and thousands of people throughout the course of his life, in different countries, in different settings, time and time again. I can do it. He was a believer in people. He was a champion of the ability and the potential of anyone to reach his potential and to become indeed another member of the godly club. And all the more so his son Yishmael. Vayera hadavar me'od. This was a very negative and misguided suggestion from his wife Sara in his eyes. And immediately came the communication from Hashem, V'yomer Elohim el Abraham, don't feel so down about this suggestion. Kol asher tomar elecha Sara shema bekola. Listen to your wife, whatever she tells you. And the reason, ki b'Yishak yikare lecha zara. The famous reason, because only with Yitzhak will your offspring be named or identified. So Abraham obviously listened to God. Do you think he bought it? You think at this point in time, Abraham was conceptually on the same page as Sarah, and he willfully and happily sent Ishmael away? Well, obviously not happily, but doing it, understanding that this was the right decision, or that he felt comfortable and content with Ishmael, not having the opportunity to influence Ishmael and leaving his school of godliness and having him dwell away? I don't think so. In fact, this was a mandate from God, and the obedient servant Abraham had no question to listen to the mandate and obey, and he did it. I think that we, at that point, should have thought and believed that Abraham was not comfortable with that. And in fact, he took that with him, I don't want to say begrudgingly, but very uncertainly throughout the course of his life, not because he did not believe, God forbid, in Hashem's mandate, but he believed in himself, his abilities, and he believed in his son Ishmael, and he knew he can do it. And here we are, faced with a very similar situation, because he has 6 more children, and they're living with Yitzhak. And guess what? There is no Sarah. And here Avraham Avinu was faced with a tremendous dilemma. Now, we have to say that Avraham Avinu, when faced with a choice between compassion, mercy, love, versus principle, Avraham Avinu has already proven that principle of which he's sure as a directive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is tantamount, is paramount rather, and is the priority. In Akedat Yitzhak, in an episode more than any other in human history, he proved that to be the case. And in fact, in our prayers, when we ask for the mercy of God every day, and in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we say, "Kemo shekabash Abraham abinu et rachamav la'asol rasoncha belevav shalem." The same way Abraham was able to overcome his mercy, his compassion, his love, his belief in people to do your will. So Abraham demonstrated that there's a time and place that principles, godly principles, will take priority even over the treatment of other people and your compassion for them. However, that episode aside, and Hashem's mandates aside, when you're faced with that dilemma, and this was a quagmire for Abraham Avinu. Here he has, again, he's a champion of all people, especially his children. He's one that believes in the never-ending potential with the proper influences and guidance of any person to go on the right path, versus the philosophy of Sara. There was a mahloket, there was a dispute between Abraham Avinu and Sara in that very conceptual idea and reality in life. What do you do in those situations? It's a struggle of principle. And here Abraham was once again in that very same situation, and there was no Sarah to contend with and to compete with him. It's just him. Where has he progressed? Has he changed? Where is he holding, as they say? Well, what's at stake? What's on the line? It's certainly the future of our nation. What is it built upon? What's its foundations? And right here, right now, Abraham Avinu makes a decision, and it says the word again in the pasuk is Vaishalehem. Please notice the similarity when Hagar and Ishmael was sent away. It says Vaishaleheha. No coincidence here. He sent them away. This was Abraham Avinu's Sarah moment. It is at this point in time where he independently faced this dilemma that he finally realized in retrospect that his great wife Sara, who at that point some say exhibited a higher level of prophecy than him, but certainly with her intuition and foresight was right. And that sometimes when you're faced with compassion, mercy, hope, belief in people, championing others, versus a difficult decision that is principled, based on pragmatism and reality, that sometimes you have to go with that. I can tell you as a teacher, we face these situations all the time. Do I fail this child, this student? I feel terrible for him, her. She's going to be crushed if I do. On the other hand, well, if I don't, what is that? What message am I sending? What does that mean for that child's future and how they face obstacles and adversity the rest of their lives? Am I really doing a favor right now for passing the child, not giving a 0 on the test that he or she cheated upon? It's a dilemma. But the answer in those situations is the small amount of pain now is going to be a tremendous amount of gain later. And it's difficult because you were compassionate as children of Abraham Avinu. At that point in time, Abraham Avinu modeled for us that in certain times, there are things that trump and triumph over compassion and love. And in the long run, it demonstrates greater compassion and love. And here, in building the foundations of our nation, the words of Sara and of God reverberated in his head. Ki b'yishak yikare lecha zara. And as Sara said, Lo yirash et ben ha'ama hazot ein b'nei in Yishak. He will not inherit. We love people. We believe in people. But we're building a nation over here. This nation has to be built on a powerful, unbreakable foundation, lineage. It has to come from the actual offspring of great people. And along the way, we'll recruit. We believe, we have compassion, we have love, and understand the potential of all. But here's a matter of principle and values that at this moment is even more important than a love and compassion for others, including his very children at this time. And in his Sara moment, it says, Vaishalehem, he understood that that our great nation has to be built from the offspring of only that original, powerful, foundational couple, Abraham and Sarah, and no one else. And by the way, we would sift out further going forward, of course, between Ishmael and Isaac. And that was an understanding that Abraham came to as the spirit of Sarah in Haye Sara lived on in the mind of Abraham Avinu, and in his last decision and the last great moment of Abraham Avinu's life, into which we are given a glimpse, he makes a decision based on the values of his wife, and he further cements and founds and establishes the great seeds of his future, powerful, gifted, and privileged nation, Am Yisrael. Shabbat Shalom.